You go back up to the beginning. Okay. Welcome to the Larson Health Podcast, where we connect the dots between physical health, mindset, and sustainable wellness. I'm your host, Kim Larson, founder of LarsonHealthWeightLoss.com. This episode of the Larson Health Podcast is proudly powered by Larson Health. Today's conversation is one of strength, hope, and the human spirit's ability to climb, literally and figuratively, through some of life's most brutal mountains. My guest is Rob Besecker, author, speaker, healthcare professional, and survivor. Despite battling chronic heart conditions and muscular dystrophy, Rob took on a challenge no one believed he could complete: a hiking expedition to Mount Everest Base Camp. But Everest Strong isn't just a memoir, it's a mindset, a mission, and a message that we're about to explore together. Rob, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Kim.
So, Rob, your story is one of incredible perseverance, right? Can you take us back to the beginning? When did your health journey start, and how did it evolve over time?
Yeah, so I have a chronic condition called myotonic dystrophy, and I started having heart problems. And so it was first discovered around 2000. And then I had a surgery to install a defibrillator pacemaker in 2003. And then fast forward a couple of years, I was diagnosed with myotonic dystrophy in 2006. So,
Oh,
when you look at the early 2000s, it was kind of like things kept raining and pouring down on myself and my family. So my father was diagnosed with muscular dystrophy in 2005, then me in 2006.
wow.
Yeah, there was a lot going on for a brief amount of time. And, that's essentially where my journey began. I found a lot of doctors in 2003 when I had my first surgery to install a defibrillator. And then the diagnosis with myotonic dystrophy. A lot of doctors have a certain mindset, and so a lot of times I was told, your body is like a battery. So don't use the battery too much on things you don't need. Don't deplete your battery if it's unnecessary. Talking about going on trips or extensive hikes or working out and things like that. The other school of thought was do what you can for as long as you can because you don't know how long you're going to have that ability.
I agree.
And yeah, me being an athlete all my life, I just, that was my school of thought is I wanted to do as much as I could so for as long as I could. And so that's kind of where my journey began.
And has nutrition played in any role within your diagnosis and your role? Because a lot of doctors don't know anything about nutrition. They might have had one class, if any. And it's amazing how food can be our medicine. So can you tell me, have you learned anything about that, and have you tried anything?
I've learned a ton about nutrition. I always tried to be what I considered to be a healthy eater, but it was a marketing gimmick, right? So I would read everything that says low fat or no fat, and I would just
Yeah.
buy it. And I would not learn about all the different things that, they do what to your body. But over the course of the last several years, I've learned a ton more, and there are certain things that work and certain things that don't.
Okay.
Obviously, I have to be very careful of sugar.
Yeah.
I'm also very careful with alcohol. I've completely cut caffeine out of my diet. I did that over 20 years ago. So I have to be very cautious with my heart rate. Um, I have to not eat foods that, create a lot of bloating. So I don't eat a lot of dairy anymore. So simple things like that. But I recently found an app on my phone. Let me look it up real quick. So an app on my phone that kind of looks up um, it looks up some of the ingredients in foods and it tells you whether or not it's healthy or not.
Okay.
So the app is called Yuka. Have you ever
Yucca.
heard of it?
Okay. I've heard of Yucca, yes. And
Yeah,
EWG.org, and
yeah.
yeah. So
So
EW.
that's one of the things I pay attention to now just to
Okay.
keep me in line.
Okay, good. Yeah, EWG.org is more of a what foods and the vegetable and fruits are sprayed the most with toxins. So like berries are sprayed a lot with toxins, bananas and avocados not so much. Apples are really sprayed. So you really want to make sure that you buy organic whenever possible so that you're not getting the glyphosate. And glyphosate used to be called Roundup, used to be called Agent Orange. So this is where so many people are getting these toxins and getting metabolic diseases and chronic diseases, and they have no idea. Well, I've been eating it since I was a kid. Oh, why am I having troubles now? Well, they have changed the industry. If you look at old labels compared to new labels, it used to be 3 or 4 ingredients in the foods that we used to eat as kids, but now they have 20 ingredients, 30 ingredients. And it's amazing that supposedly those are more affordable than just buying the 3 or 4 ingredients. And a lot of this stuff is just toxins. They put a lot of gums in them, which are bad for our gut. They put a lot of like carrageenan and all kinds of gums that just ruin your gut lining. So it's important to eat an anti-inflammatory diet. That means don't buy packaged foods. Don't buy anything low fat. Eat plenty of avocado. Get omega-3 fish oils. Things that are going to be important for your joints, for your brain, for your heart. So anyway. So you've been learning over time though, right?
I have, yeah. And so, I saw something about the 6 pillars of health recently, and it really jumped out at me. And so, the different pillars, not in any particular order, are nutrition, physical activity, managing stress, which is like relationships and the social aspect,
Yeah.
getting restful sleep. Sleep is really important. Nutrition is really important. Physical
Yeah.
activity is really important. And then obviously avoiding risk, not smoking, not doing drugs,
Yes.
being careful about what goes in and what comes out of your body.
Yes. Yeah, and that's been something that I recognized after having my own experience during COVID, where I had put on a bunch of weight. We weren't going out. I wasn't running outside anymore. Or at least I was afraid to, because early on in COVID, and gyms were closed. I wasn't going out on sales meetings. I was actually pretty depressed because I wasn't getting out and meeting people. I'm an extrovert, right? So I was like, oh my God, I can't see the regular people. So yeah, so putting on weight and going to my doctor and finding out I had all these, prediabetes, high blood pressure, high triglycerides, arthritis. And that's how I got into functional nutrition, is because what is going on with my body and why? So,
Right.
and obviously I was eating pizza and cookies and, things that I shouldn't eat. And I had never eaten before, really. Occasionally I would have it, obviously, but not much. So, but yeah, so interesting to learn how food is our medicine and what we put in our body really makes a difference. And obviously everybody is different.
Sure.
And they can eat, like I know a guy who eats SpaghettiOs all the time and has cases of soda delivered to his house. And oh, look, I'm doing, Chef Boyardee ravioli versus the SpaghettiOs. See, I change it up every once in a while. I'm like, just wait, it's going to catch up with you. You know,
Yeah, and I find in nutrition and all aspects of health that, balance is really important.
it is.
Um, I still have my vices. It's summertime. I love ice cream. I'll always love pizza. So, I think it's important to have your, quote unquote cheat days,
Yes.
or take care of yourself mentally and emotionally too. Uh,
Yes.
but yeah, balance is key.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and I realize that wheat, so the top things that are sprayed with glyphosate are that most people eat are wheat, corn, and gluten, and soy. So I had learned that wheat causes a lot of inflammation unless you can buy it organic or unbromated. Like I just found a local baker that has unbromated wheat and it's organic wheat. So they use that, and I've been able to eat their bread. I don't eat it all the time, but it's a nice little treat every once in a while.
Yeah. Yeah, I still do my sandwiches, and I found a sprout bread that's,
Okay, yeah.
highly recommended and tends to work out. A lot of people think that stuff tastes like cardboard. I disagree. I think, especially if
That's a
you
good
put it in
one.
the toaster and, put something on there to moisten it up a little bit, it's all good.
Yeah, exactly. So you were an athlete, a scholar, and a leader early on. So what was it like to navigate, the chronic illness in the midst of such potential?
Yeah, it's interesting. So, I was a high school and college athlete. when I was in my senior year in high school, this kind of helped prepare me, right? So when I was a senior in high school, I broke my back. I broke my
Ooh,
lower back and my fourth and fifth lower lumbar vertebrae.
wow.
And so I had to navigate whether or not I was gonna, go to college on a football scholarship. I ended up taking a baseball scholarship to a local school. And so that experience really prepared me for a lot of the changes that I was going to go through later on with my diagnoses. Um, the way I always phrase it, I mean, we all go through obstacles and challenges in life. I call them detours.
Yeah,
We have a certain path in our head that that's what we're going to do, and that's going to work out. And something kind of detours us and gets us off that track. And it's really important to make the adaptations necessary to figure out your new track and make the best of it. And so,
I agree.
yeah, my experience in high school helped prepare me for that. And then when I started dealing with all my health struggles, it was kind of the same thing. It's like, okay, I got detoured. I can't do that. So now what can I do? And
Yeah.
so that's been the nature of my journey.
And that's a great mindset, right? It's a detour. It doesn't mean that you're going to be finished for the rest of your life, right?
Right.
It's a detour, you figure it out, you make it work for yourself and go on. So in 2011, your body endured like unimaginable trauma, right? ICD shocks, multiple surgeries, even a collapsed lung. So how did you find the strength to keep going?
I love that question. And so I oftentimes kind of propose another question in response to that. What are my options? So, when you're faced with this type of adversity, you really have two options. You get knocked down so you can get up and keep going, or you can quit. And quitting has just never been an option for me. I'm always going to find a way to struggle through it. I'm always going to find things. I think it's important to have goals and aspirations.
I agree.
And I've always tried to connect with, what can I do? It's the whole detour thing, right? Like, okay, if I can't go to A, then maybe I can go to B. And so, I know we're going to talk about more about Everest, but that's where it came from.
Okay.
Just trying to find other things to kind of put our energy into and be successful.
And where do you think this came from? Because, some people will have an experience like that and they will collapse. They can't get their brain around what do I do next? How do I do this? How do I, you know, create some place that I can grow? I can learn from this. So what do you think? How did that work for you?
Yeah, so I mean, for me, I've always been an athlete. I've always been somebody who aspired to do more, but yeah, it's really easy to get depressed when you're going through all these changes and all these conditions. And for me, I found a lot of my strength in other people. So, I talked about the six pillars of health, and one of them is relationships and the social aspect. And so, I've connected myself with a lot of different support groups for some of my different illnesses and, reaching out to doctors and, obviously talking to you about nutrition. There's so many people that you can gain knowledge from.
Yes.
And, that's always given me strength.
Yeah.
And you hear different ideas. So, like when we talk about, my excursion to Mount Everest Base Camp, like I didn't grow up as a kid wanting to go to Mount Everest, and I didn't grow up as a kid being a big hiker. It was just something that happened. And so when my father was diagnosed with muscular dystrophy and he was going through all of his changes with his diagnosis, my father was one of those people that kind of stopped wanting to do anything.
Oh,
He
really?
stopped
Okay.
wanting to, yeah, he didn't want to go out in public. He didn't want to go to ball games. He didn't want to do anything. And so I really wanted to do the opposite of that just because I saw how unhappy he was. I wanted to make the changes. And just through opportunity, I've always been a big traveler. And
Okay.
I used to work for the airlines when I was younger. And so I had gotten to the point where I'd been to a lot of different continents. And so in 2009, I did a trip to Asia. I took a Southeast Asia cruise. And that was my sixth continent. And then I decided, okay, in 2010, I wanted to go to my seventh continent. So I did a trip to Antarctica. And while I was actually on the trip to Antarctica, one of the speakers we had on this cruise was Peter Hillary, the son
Okay.
of Sir Edmund Hillary, the first to ever summit Mount Everest. So
Okay.
that's when I started hearing some of the first stories about Everest. I mean, I knew it was the tallest mountain in the world, but I didn't know where Nepal was. I didn't realize it was nestled, right next to China and Tibet and all that stuff. Like I had no idea the geography. Um, so that kind of introduced me. And then in 2011, like you said, I had 5 cardiac surgeries.
God.
A lot of people could not figure out what was wrong, what was going on with my heart. Nobody expected me to make a full recovery. So I went through a year of transition in 2011, but then in 2012, I began that recovery. And so my sister and I both work in the healthcare industry.
Okay.
And so she had learned about a trip that physicians were doing to Everest Base Camp. And
Okay.
so I went to my doctors in 2013 and said, "Hey, I want to do this trip to Mount Everest Base Camp. What do you think?" And, the going consensus was, "Are you nuts?" And everybody told me no for a variety of reasons. They told me no, I couldn't do Everest. So in 2013, I didn't do Everest, but I don't like being told what I can and cannot do.
Right.
So it really fueled my spirit again to, all right, how can I do this? And I want to be intelligent. Like, I don't want to put myself in harm's way. I don't want to take unnecessary risks, but I want to continue to live my life.
Yes, absolutely.
So I started talking to the doctors and going back and forth. These are the potential problems. This is how to resolve these issues or avoid these issues.
Okay.
So for 2 years, I trained and I kept speaking with various healthcare professionals on, what modifications I can make to the trip. And finally, I got permission to go to Mount Everest in 2015, and it was awesome. It was wonderful.
And now you're planning another 10-year anniversary trip, right?
I am. So, again, I talk about detours, right? So I did Everest in 2015. And then, so my hope was to do a hike up the Inca Trail to Machu Picchu in 2020. But as you know, in 2020, we went through COVID. In 2021, we were still going through COVID. So
Yeah.
all the trips to Machu Picchu were canceled. And then in 2003, there was like an attempt or 2023, there was an attempt to overthrow the government in Peru. And so that created a dynamic mess that was unsafe to travel.
Yeah.
So for one reason or another, it kept getting delayed. So what was supposed to be a 5-year anniversary trip is now a 10-year anniversary
Okay.
trip. And so, yeah, in August, I'm set to hike up the Inca Trail to Machu Picchu. And
Cool. And that's a 3-day hike, right?
it's a 4-day hike.
4-day. Okay.
Yeah, it's a 4-day hike.
Well, cool.
Yeah.
Well, the Larson Health Podcast is brought to you by LarsonHealthWeightLoss.com, where healing begins with the food on your plate. Are you ready to reset your mindset and body? Visit us online today at LarsonHealthWeightLoss.com. We're here with Rob Besecker, whose story is redefining what it means to be strong. So, Rob, you went on to earn your MBA, work in healthcare, and lead major initiatives in hospice care. So, what fuels your desire, to keep achieving despite health setbacks?
Yeah, a lot of it's been a personal mindset. And, again, one of the questions is, what other options do we have? I want to enjoy my life. And, finding things that you enjoy can sometimes be difficult, especially when you have a lot of these obstacles you have to overcome. But I think it's still possible, it's still doable.
Yes.
And one of the things I learned in life, like if life is a train, and it's just going around in a constant circle around the world. It's like sometimes we get knocked off the train for a little bit. And again, our option is to get back on the train and keep going, or we can stay off the train because the circle of life is going to continue, right?
Yes.
And that train is going to keep moving whether we get on or get off.
Yeah.
So I just find it a lot more enjoyable and a lot more beneficial to be on the train. So anytime I get derailed, anytime something happens, these different obstacles that we all deal with in our day-to-day lives, whether it be work, whether it be health, whether it be relationships, there's always setbacks, but it's also an opportunity to kind of figure out what train you belong on and get back on.
Sure. And so, you talk about these detours. So how do you manage that goal setting and motivation when your health is unpredictable?
Well, there's certain aspects of health that are predictable, and I always approach it with a positive mindset, and I try to figure out what the obstacles are. So similar to Everest, like if you go up to a certain altitude, then it's more difficult to get oxygen. Oxygen is highly depleted at altitude. So it's like, okay, well, what if I were to bring an oxygen tank? Heaven forbid I need it. Or how about I trained at altitude? So I went and did some training in Denver, Colorado to try to prepare for things. So
Nice.
I mean, there's always going to be obstacles that we don't expect.
Sure.
But by the same token, those are the detours. And whenever you're faced with a new situation, you talk to professionals in the field, you try to figure out what various options there are. You make whatever modifications you need to your itinerary or your goals and so forth. And then you just keep moving forward. And sometimes it's those little baby steps that do it. Just put one foot in front of the other and keep going. And that's what I do.
And so how do you train for preparing for this hike? Like how did you train for Everest? How are you training for your new hike?
Yeah, so for Everest, I did a lot of different things. So I traveled around the country trying to find different places for altitude because altitude sickness is the main thing you have to be careful of when you're hiking up in the mountains. Because with any hike, with any athletic activity, obviously talk to your doctor first, make sure it's safe, but then go slowly and be mindful of your body. Your body kind of tells you what it can handle and what it can't handle.
Yes.
So you just keep building up and building slowly, right? And so I traveled around the country and I hiked at various altitudes. So, here in the Midwest, we're pretty much at water level,
Yeah.
maybe a little bit above, right? And then I went out to 3,000 feet. And then I went out somewhere for 5,000 feet. And then I traveled out to Washington State and I went to 7,000 feet. And I did, hikes during parts of Mount Rainier. And I went up into Vancouver, Canada, and I did something called the Grouse Grind. And then I came back in the True Testament to prepare was I wanted to hike one of the 14ers out in Colorado. So
Okay.
I flew out to Colorado for a week so I could do a week of training at altitude. And it was simple things, really. You're just doing it at altitude, but I walked on a treadmill. I walked outside in the snow because I did this trip in November.
Okay.
There was a lot of different things I did to prepare. And saw a travel nurse, and I was on something called Diamox, which is good for people with altitude, or it's something that can be recommended. And
Okay.
so, yeah, I just, again, you try to figure out what different things you can do to help you achieve your goal. And my ultimate goal was getting altitude at Mount Everest. And so right now I'm doing a lot of the same types of things and preparing for Machu Picchu. So I do daily hikes. Um, I haven't done much with altitude, but I go a lot to the dunes in Indiana, and
Okay.
I'll walk up the Indiana Dunes National Park. And so, that going up those, brief hills in the sand is really hard on your legs and your body. And so it's been great for me to train with that. And then I'll be going to Canada sometime in the next month to do some training up there in the mountains. And then, yeah, I'll take my trip. So again, you
Okay.
just baby steps with the things you can that help you reach your goal.
Sure. And so, back when you did Everest 10 years ago, what did reaching that summit mean for you, especially after all that you'd been going through, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually?
Yeah, it was. I don't know words that can totally classify how I feel. The way I talk about Everest, it's the most difficult thing I ever did on purpose. So going through all my challenges, being told, they couldn't figure out what was going on with my health. They didn't know how to fix it. They didn't think I was going to make a full recovery. And then all of a sudden, to kind of, quiet all the doubters and focus on all the people that were continually giving me positive support. Again, that's where I gained my strength. I gained my strength through others. It really pushed me to keep trying to move forward. And so when I finally got to Everest Base Camp, it was the most awesome experience ever. And a lot of times it's about the people we meet on the way during our journeys. So in 2010, I had the opportunity to meet Peter Hillary. You know, again, Everest legend. His father was the first to ever summit Mount Everest and return alive. And he did it with someone called Gemling Norgay. And so Peter Hillary is Sir Edmund Hillary's oldest child. And
Okay.
then I had the ability to meet Jamling Norgay, who was his father, was the Sherpa who accompanied Peter Hillary
You're kidding.
on the hike. So, like, I had the opportunity to meet both of these wonderful gentlemen that are just like travel legends and Mount Everest legends. And so things like that drove me. And then when I was on the trip to Everest Base Camp, there's several teams up in the mountains during that time doing various expeditions and climbs. And so I had the ability to meet a team of climbers from South America who were getting ready to summit Everest and then summit Lhotse, the
Okay.
two tallest mountains out there. And so just, meeting these guys along the route and them learning about my story and my drive, like we worked as teams. And so the day I got to Everest Base Camp, like I will never forget this. I'm a big hugger. I love physical connection. And so the main climber on this expedition for them, this famous climber from Peru, came up to me and gave me the biggest bear hug ever.
Ah, I love it.
And it was just, so during my journey up to Mount Everest, unfortunately, I had a team of three, not including the Sherpas and guides that we had. And so my sister was on this expedition with us. She wanted to watch over me and make sure I was okay. And my sister actually suffered altitude sickness during the climb up to Everest
Oh,
Base Camp. So she unfortunately had to be medically evacuated down from the
oh
mountain.
no.
So I struggled with, do I continue? Do I continue to push forward and get to Everest Base Camp? Do I go down with her? And, there was a lot of struggles that took place. But when I finally got to Everest Base Camp and I got that bear hug, again, it was the most awesome thing ever. And words
It's
don't,
such a reward.
yeah, it was amazing.
That's cool.
It was absolutely amazing.
So you're listening to the Larson Health Podcast with Rob Besecker. Get functional nutrition strategies and metabolic disease changing meals that support your body at larsonhealthweightloss.com. I'm your host, Kim Larson, and we're diving into a powerful conversation about hope, hardship, and healing with Rob Besecker. So, Rob, tell us about the earthquake that struck you while at Everest and how did it impact your journey and your outlook on life?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And it's a lot to dissect in one question. So we reached Everest Base Camp on, I believe, the 20th of March.
Okay.
And then so, with altitude, when you're climbing up altitude, you try to be cognizant of altitude sickness. So you can only go up in smaller increments, right? So it took us 10 days to get from the mountain town of Lukla up to Everest Base Camp.
Okay.
But coming down, you don't have to be as mindful to the altitude sickness because you're going down in elevation.
Okay.
So we actually made it back from base camp to the mountain town of Lukla in the late afternoon, early evening of the 24th.
Oh, okay.
And
So
so
two, is that two, no, 4 days back?
4 days back.
Okay.
Yeah, we made it back in 4 days. And then on the fifth day, the day we were actually supposed to fly back down out of the mountains of Lukla, is the day the earthquake hit. And
Okay.
we were sitting in a tea house and we were having lunch, getting ready for our flight back to Kathmandu. And the earthquake struck. And wow, what a jolting experience. I had never been through an earthquake before.
And it was
Uh,
strong, wasn't it?
it was very strong. Yeah, it was 7.8 on the Richter scale, I believe.
Wow. Wow.
And so, I mean, everybody in Nepal felt it. And in the mountain town of Lukla, like, so the mountains in Nepal were decimated. Uh, base camp had severe avalanches, and it was the worst loss of life at Everest Base Camp in its history as a result
Really?
of all this going on. And there were mudslides, and even
Hmm.
in the mountain town of Lukla, where I was, there were, some of the buildings came down and collapsed, and people were getting crushed by debris from either the mountains because there were, a lot of rocks reformulating and some of the different slides that occurred. So
Wow.
it was, I mean, it was jolting mentally, physically, emotionally. It was really tough. Again, how do I prepare for that? I've been
Right.
working in healthcare and I've been working in hospice and palliative care since 2007. And so I've experienced a lot of loss of life in my world. In 2009, my father passed away.
Mm.
In 2012, my mother passed away. And then so we did this expedition to Mount Everest Base Camp in 2015. So again, you draw back on your experiences to try to help you understand and move forward with whatever it is you're going through.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, it shaped my life tremendously.
Yeah. Boy, that had to be hard to lose both your parents in such a short amount of time frame and with all the medical stuff you had going on. I mean, what a struggle.
It was
So,
a decade of disaster for sure.
yeah, yeah. And you
But
took,
by the same token, it's also the circle of life, right? I mean,
right.
we all have our positive and negative experiences that shape us. And I truly believe that in every negative experience, there's almost always something good that can be found of it.
And something to learn usually.
Always, yeah.
Yeah.
And so when my parents struggled at the end of life, I had the opportunity to connect with them on a level that I really never experienced before. And I look at it like the circle of life. Like when you're born, when you're an infant, you need your parents to take care of you. That's
Yes.
that's how you survive. And the opportunity to repay that at the end of life when I'm now an adult and have the ability, and they're losing their ability to care for themselves. The ability to, kind of help them in that time is just, it was very gratifying. So that's the positive.
That's cool.
Uh, Obviously, I miss my parents. I love them,
Yeah,
but it's one of the detours of life, right?
it is. Yes. So you talk about being forever strong. What does that phrase mean to you, especially in the work with hospice and healthcare?
So initially, so I do a lot of plays on words and I love numbers. And so originally, forever, the word forever came from four because I was 40 when I did the hiking expedition to Mount Everest. Ever, because I was doing the hike to Everest Base Camp, so ever. And then strong, just remaining strong throughout life's challenges. So, what does forever strong mean? It means you're always making modifications, you're always setting goals, and you're making sure that they're realistic and achievable goals. Just one effort after another to keep moving forward. So, like me in my life, I consider myself to be unique and interesting with certain things, and so I love holidays.
Okay.
Like we have 365 days a year, and for the most part, they're kind of monotonous, right? You do the same thing a lot of times, work is the same a lot of times. So I try to change things up as often as possible. I celebrate all the different occasions and holidays. Like I celebrate Star Wars Day, May the 4th be with you, St. Patrick's Day, along with all the major holidays. I just love getting involved and being festive and breaking the monotony of day to day life. And that's what keeps me moving a lot.
Cool. That is really cool. I love Star Wars. So yeah, we love, May the 4th be with you. So all right, so what do you say to someone who feels like their diagnosis has disqualified them from living a meaningful life?
Well, the first thing I'd say is I hear you. It's hard. And we need to kind of get in touch with our emotions and figure out what we're going through and how exactly it's affecting us. So the realization that you are going through something difficult is important. Like, this happens.
Yeah,
Uh, and the next thing is just try to figure out what are your loves in life? What do you love to do? Because I always find that there's something we can do. It doesn't matter if it's a movie, if it's a book, if it's a trip, if it's a climb, whatever our ability levels, whatever our interests are, we can find something to set our goals towards, set our mind towards.
I
And
agree.
I find that to be extremely imperative when we're moving forward because, the world has gotten very negative. In certain places. And I don't want to talk politics or anything like that, but a lot of times it's hard to find that motivation. And it's really important to surround yourself with positive people and focus
I
on
agree.
realistic, achievable goals and just take the very next step.
I
Don't worry
agree.
about the goal because the
Start
goal is great,
small.
but sometimes the journey to get to the goal is where a lot of this stuff happens.
Yeah, it's like eating an elephant, right? It's you just got to take one bite at a time. It's a big project. I mean, I used to be in sales for calling on the elephant accounts, right? The large corporate Fortune 500 accounts. And you didn't just close an account like that overnight. You had to take baby steps. You had to learn about the account. You had to meet the people. You had to build those relationships, understand truly what they needed, and not try to sell them everything under the sun. You try to find a solution for what they need. So I think that's kind of like how it is for anybody in the who needs to face their health, whether it be because of a disease or whether they had a car accident or muscular dystrophy. How am I going to overcome this? Let's take the first step. And that's how it goes, right?
Yeah, and a lot of times, the biggest thing is just figuring out what we enjoy and what makes us passionate, and then just go that direction.
Yes, I agree. Cool. So what do you say to someone who sorry, I asked you that.
Ah, it's
This,
all right.
this segment is powered by Larson Health and LarsonHealthWeightLoss.com. You want to restore your energy, reduce inflammation, heal from the inside out? Check out our 4-week Food is Medicine program today. So thank you for sticking with us. Rob Besecker has been sharing his incredible story of triumph over adversity, and we're closing with some final insights. So, for someone who's just received a life altering diagnosis, what's the first mindset shift you recommend?
Figuring out the diagnosis and exactly how that's going to alter your life. What alterations is that going to make, and how do you prepare? And so I think, communicating with your physicians, communicating with your loved ones is extremely important in that. And then once you figure out what direction we kind of anticipate things going, making modifications to our goals and choices, and kind of finding ways to adapt to that. And yeah, I mean, that's what I've always done in my life. That's what I did for Everest. That's what I'm doing for Machu Picchu. It's not always easy, but it can always be done.
Now, is your sister going to join you for Machu Picchu?
No, she's not. I don't think she ever wants to travel with me ever again. But we've had a lot of interesting, I've had a lot of interesting experience in my travels. So, if you remember the 1996 bombing at the Olympics where the pipe bomb went off in a
Yeah.
garbage can, like I was literally at that exact same spot listening to a concert the night before that happened.
Wow.
So there's been a lot of close calls. Uh,
Yeah.
when I did the Southeast Asia trip I was talking about, when we were coming back through Thailand. And so there was an attempt to overthrow the government in Thailand. And I was literally on the last flight that left Thailand before they closed the airport for a couple of weeks.
Wow.
And a lot of the people from our trip got stuck. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of adversity that happens in life. And
And she's like, I'm not traveling with you anymore.
yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So is she still traveling though?
She travel is something we both love to do, and we do it a little differently. So my sister's a little bit older. She doesn't have the same athletic background or prowess, So
Okay.
she loves to go and travel and visit places. And, I'm still trying to stay as young as possible and do these
Yes. Good
various
for you.
things. So, yeah,
Yeah. Stay busy. Keep
always,
going.
always busy.
Yeah. So you play volleyball? What else?
Yeah, so I still play volleyball 2 nights a week in a sand volleyball league, and I still bowl in a league. Uh,
Okay.
so some of the modifications, like I'm a huge baseball and football player. I was supposed to go to college on a football scholarship. After I broke my back, I ended up
Right.
going to college on a baseball scholarship. So I played flag football and softball for years, but I gave that up about 10 years ago. After I went through all the surgeries in 2011 and a lot of the question marks, those were the two sports I kind of discontinued because my body wasn't recovering as well. But I've still found myself able to play volleyball, um, not necessarily at a high level, but beggars can't be choosers.
Hey, you're still playing. You're still getting out there and being active.
Absolutely. It's a way to get out and enjoy yourself and spend some time with friends. And then bowling. So I still get my competitive edge by competing in these, sports.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah. So,
Cool. So what's next for you? Are you have any new projects or speaking events or goals on the horizon other than your hike?
yeah. So there's always stuff going on, right? And yeah, I'll never run out of goals. So, interesting thing about me, I've been to all 7 continents. I wanted to go to all 50 US states. I've been to all 50 US states. I am a big baseball and football lover. So I've been to a home game at every Major League Baseball stadium and a home game at every NFL football stadium.
Cool.
So my new goal, so I really want to do this trip to Machu Picchu.
Hmm.
And I also want to travel to all the US national parks. So right now, I think there's 64 dedicated US national parks, and I've probably been to about 30.
Okay.
And like every one of them is wonderful and offers something unique and different. And it's been interesting to explore those.
Yeah.
And so I look forward to continuing in that journey.
And do you have any new projects or speaking events?
So there's been a lot of questions as to whether or not I would write a book. So
And you have
again,
one book out already.
I do. So in reference to my first book, I never grew up and intended on writing a book. That was never my aspiration. But because of the uniqueness of all my situations, several of my doctors recommend that I write a book and try to reach out to other people. So again, I gained my strength through others. I love working with everybody else. That's why I work in hospice care. That's how I got involved in the healthcare industry. That's why I do various support groups, and I just try to get involved with as many people as I can because I feel sharing my story helps people move forward.
I
And so
agree.
that's something I always wanted to do. And so, yeah, I'll continue to do that. And so I can't remember what the original question was. I'm sorry.
Oh, just for, what your new project speaking events.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I was encouraged to write my first book, and I didn't realize how beneficial it would be for me to write the book. I wrote the book to try to help others, but in going back through some of the things that I survived and lived with, it also helped me heal.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times to get through a situation, you kind of just put it off to the side and move forward.
You need to talk about it. You need to get it out.
Yeah, you really got to face it and figure
Yeah.
out how it impacts you. And so I've thought a lot about writing a secondary book. I've put a lot of thought and time into trying to figure out what direction that would go. And I talk about relationships and how important our relationships are. And I had always joked. So when I was writing my first book, when I was looking for, kind of like the beginning and ending point, I recognized, a lot of my troubles were heart related, and I was still single. And so I thought, wow, what would be more inspiring than the end of my book being falling in love and getting married?
Yeah.
So the joke is, well, that still hasn't happened yet. But we can continue to push forward and find other goals. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah.
And you can keep aspiring to find that goal. So I wouldn't give
Always.
up on that, right?
Never, 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 never give up on any goals.
Right. And finally, how can our listeners get a copy of Everest Strong and stay connected with your mission?
So the best and easy way is you can order copies on Amazon.com. You can check out the reviews and you can order through Amazon, and that's the quickest delivery system. However, you can also go to your local library. So it's a certified book through the Library of Congress. So any library can gain access to it. And if you go into your local library and say you'd like it, they might not have it on hand, but they'll usually order a copy for you and you can get it there as well.
Cool. Well, Rob, thank you for sharing your heart, your courage, and your Everest. Your story
Thank
reminds
you.
us that no matter how steep the climb, we are more capable than we think, and our greatest victory often come after our greatest battles.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure being on your podcast.
Thank you. And if today's conversation spoke to you, remember your life's detours may just be preparing you for your own summit moment. So until next time, keep climbing, keep believing, and know that you are forever strong. Connect with Rob Besecker at robbesecker.com and check out the show notes for more ways to connect with Rob Besecker. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.